Got it.
Yep. Okay. So thanks for joining tonight. And gosh, 2 or 3 months ago, we were talking about doing an outing to photograph the Milky Way. And based on my attempts to photograph the Milky Way, I said, look, it takes a bit of planning to get this right. And a lot of times you're out at odd times of the night and you're fumbling around in the dark. And so I thought maybe we would do a planning session to talk about what it takes to really plan before we actually organize a trip. So let me just get to started. So tonight I wanted to cover planning, what time of year, where to go to photograph, what are some of the resources available through either websites or apps, and some of the challenges that we face. Then we're going to talk about equipment, must-haves versus nice-to-haves. Execution is going to be, when you actually go out to photograph the Milky Way and focusing on safety. Remember, you're working in the dark. What are some considerations around exposure settings, long exposure guidelines, and dark slides or dark images, dark exposures, which can help in post-processing if you're going to be stacking multiple images. And then I have a demo on post-processing that we'll go through as well. So the orange circle represents where we are physically, where the Earth, where our planets are in relation to the overall Milky Way galaxy. But what's interesting is all the individual stars you're looking at in the night sky are all part of this Milky Way galaxy. The most interesting photography, from a photography standpoint, the most interesting photographs is when you are photographing towards the core or the Milky Way galaxy center. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. So this is an example of a photograph, a nighttime photograph of the Milky Way arch. And you can see the core is closer to the horizon here, and it's going to contain some of the brighter areas of the Milky Way. So let's talk about planning. A lot of considerations. There is a season for the Milky Way. For example, in the wintertime, the Milky Way is not visible from our location. You do need to be concerned about the moon phase, what time the moon is going to rise and when it's going to set. You need to consider your physical location and most from a perspective of light pollution and the light pollution impact of your location. And then, of course, weather conditions. You can do all the best planning and then come to find out there's bad weather or rain or cloud coverage that's going to impact your shot. So let's look at time of year and time of day. So I put this chart together. This is a timing in when the Milky Way is visible from here in Connecticut. And as you can see in January, there is no visibility. In February, there is visibility for about an hour, 20 minutes, but this is very early morning. So you're looking at 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. As you progress into the summer months, you'll see that the duration of the visibility extends here 4 hours, 30 minutes, and in July, 4 hours, 40 minutes. And the time of visibility is getting more reasonable. So in June, you're still, 12:30 in the morning, start of visibility around 12:30 in the morning for the core. In July, it's going to be a little bit earlier. And then in August, even earlier. So my attempts to capture the Milky Way have typically been done in this August, September timeframe. And that's where I find I can kind of focus and give it the attention it needs. The core is visible early enough at night where I think you're able to capture.
Kevin, how
Yeah.
does that work for different latitudes, north or south?
Yeah, so it changes a bit depending on where you are, north, southern hemisphere. Um, there is, my understanding is there's a lot better opportunities southern hemisphere than there are northern hemisphere. Um, but it will change based on your latitude. So you should check. For example, I traveled to Baja California in Mexico, so I was much further south. And in October, the visibility, the Milky Way arch in the core was much higher in elevation than it is here in Connecticut. So it is going to change, and it's good to understand based on what latitude you're at, what the impact will be for visibility and elevation.
Thanks.
For us, the core elevation is going to be less than 20 degrees. So if you are looking to photograph the core, you're going to need to have a location that has good visibility towards the south without any mountains that could potentially be blocking where the core would appear in the sky. And I have some examples of this as we go forward. The second thing you want to think about is the moon phase. The moon will, the illumination of the moon could significantly impact the density of stars that you're going to capture. The moon casts a lot of light. That light is going to play with any type of humidity or dust in the air. So that could really impact the overall quality of the photo that you capture. And that, what I noticed down, because Baja California was desert-like conditions, and I mean, absolutely no humidity in the air. And boy, I'll tell you, the sky was just looking at the stars was absolutely crystal clear. This is just more of a just basic principle. You know, new moons always rise near sunrise. First quarter moons always rise near noon. Full moon near sunset. Last quarter moon near midnight. And this is just good to know if you were going to try to go out after moonset to capture the Milky Way. Just something to keep in mind. There are a lot of really good resources online. This is from the Astronomy Club of Akron, Ohio. And this is an example for July showing the new moon on July 5th. So a good time in July to consider would be, I'd feel comfortable anywhere between the 3rd and probably the 8th, because you don't have too much light coming in around the 3rd or the 8th. But certainly that would be your window where you would want to consider if you're looking to capture the Milky Way and deep sky objects, this is your window to do that. This is an overall view of 2024, and this will give you the new moon. So in July it's the 5th, August will be the 4th, September 2nd, October 2nd, November 1st, December 1st. And these are very easy to find. One good website with a lot of good references is timeanddate.com. And you can go out there and print these and use these for pre-planning. And they even include additional detail on specific moonrise and moonset for each day of the month, which could be helpful depending on what time you're going out to photograph. I use PhotoPills, as do a lot of other photographers that do nighttime photography. And PhotoPills just has a lot of different features, and I'll be showing some of those features tonight as we go through it. This is a paid application. It's $10.99 to purchase the app, And they also have some very good tutorials online, not only on how to use the app, but on just tips on photographing the Milky Way, tips on photographing meteors, all these different nighttime photos. There's some really good tutorials online. So if you open up the PhotoPills app, one of the pills, and each of these items here are called the pills within the application. One of those is the moon pill. And the moon pill will give you not only a lot of good information on the moon, but it's going to give you information on sunrise, sunset, and when the Milky Way galactic center will be visible at the same time. So let's move forward and I'll show you an example of that. So if you click on the moon pill, it is going to open up this window. And there's a lot of good information here. So this is telling me for yesterday, Tuesday, June 11th, moon set was at 12:09 in the morning, and the galactic center was going to end at 3:07. So 3:07 yesterday morning. 5:17 was sunrise. Here's your moonrise. Here's your sunset. And at last night, the galactic center visibility was going to start at 10:36 p.m. Now, keep in mind, the elevation is still pretty low at 10:36 p.m. If you want to click on the calendar, if you want to see the where the moon is and what the next full moon is, by simply selecting the calendar, it's going to give you the view to the right, where you can then just swipe through the months, and you can see that in July, new moon is on the 5th, and you continue to scroll through to see the other months and when the new moon will occur. So for moon references, I included a few different links that I think are very helpful. If you don't want to pay for the app PhotoPills, I would really recommend the timeanddate.com. There's a lot of really good information in there for moon phase against the calendar. The Astronomy Club of Akron has a lot of good resources there as well. And of course, PhotoPills, if you decide you want to invest in that application. So let's look at physical location. So a dark sky is going to be important to see the details in the core. And typically you're going to be looking towards the south. So you want to make sure you have good visibility towards the south. And of course, that means if you are thinking of a foreground image and you're standing south of that foreground image looking to the north, there's simply no way you're going to be getting the core in that image, because you have to be looking, you're going to have to be photographing towards the south to be able to get the core into the image. And again, low on the horizon. So you do want to find a location that's not going to be blocked by mountains or other objects that could block the view. And the other issue is dark sky. And so one of the challenges we have in New England is light pollution. This is a really good website you can go to look at the light pollution of different locations across the US. And this is another application. This is lightpollutionmap.info. And you can see that there's just, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, there's just light pollution. We can't get away from it just due to the population density and the amount of light that is here. The dark sky location on the East Coast is actually here in Pennsylvania. And that is, I believe, Cherry Springs State Park. And I believe this is the designated dark sky location in Pennsylvania. And we did have a speaker a year or two back that had talked about staying overnight in Pennsylvania in the dark sky location. I believe this is where he was. And they do allow people to stay overnight. And a lot of people do assemble there for astrophotography, Milky Way photography images. But with that said, we do have still some good locations. And Nancy had taken this picture in Rhode Island. So if you look back on the light pollution map, you would say, gosh, there's still a lot of light pollution in Rhode Island. But with that said, there's still some really good opportunities. And this is a shot that Nancy took, a great foreground image with the core directly behind that. On the left-hand side where the clouds are, is that reflecting some ground light? Yeah, most likely. So most likely you're seeing a little bit of light pollution from a town nearby, but still, it's a great opportunity and a great shot. So the references for dark sky, the Blue Marble Light Pollution Map and International Dark Sky Association, those links are here. And again, if anybody wants the slides, I'd be happy to provide the slides to you. So let's take a look at the PhotoPills app. And we can use this app to actually look at a specific location and do some planning around that location. So the very first step would be to launch the app, then select the planner as the pill that you want to launch. The next step is to actually drop a pin. This is a red pin. And the way you do that is to simply put your finger over the screen and hold down where you want that red pin to drop. And you're going to see a lot of lines appear once you do that. And I'll explain what these are. So when you drop that pin, depending on what layers you have, you're going to see a lot of different lines here. One is going to be the direction of sunrise. Another will be the direction of moonrise. Another will be the direction that the core will be above the horizon and the direction that the core will go below the horizon. And then you have your sunset and your moonset. You can modify this and you can try to clean up this view. So what I typically do is over here, the settings, it looks like a layer icon. If you select that, you can turn off the sun, you can turn off the moon, but leave the Milky Way on. And that will help clean up the view so that you're only looking at the Milky Way, the core, and what directions the core will be visible and what direction it will set. And then using, this is called the time bar. And if you slide to the left or slide to the right, you can change the time. And when you do that, you'll start to see the visibility of the Milky Way. So in this example, I slid the time bar to 12:10 a.m. on June 13th. My location is this parking lot on Barn Door Hills Road, and I guess it's Granby there, right, Karen? I think that'd be correct. Granby at that point, maybe?
Yeah, it's Granby.
Yep, thank you. So at that time, you can see that the Milky Way core will be visible and it'll be at an elevation of almost 18 degrees. And then the overall arch will be visible and that will be at an elevation of 49.7 degrees. So I have a demo of this, so let's go through that. So let's go ahead and launch the PhotoPills app. And we're going to select Planner on the upper left-hand side. And for this plan, we're going to look at the visibility of the Milky Way arch and core from Barn Door Hills Road. And I have the date currently set to June 11th. So I'm going to drop a pin. We're going to drop a red pin right by the parking lot. And you're going to see the different colored lines show up for both the sun, the moon, and the Milky Way. So we're going to turn off some of these map layers so we just clean up our view. Now we can see a light gray line and a dark gray line. And this is what we're interested in with respect to the Milky Way core in the Milky Way arch. We also see a lot of circular white lines. This has to do with the elevation, and I'll show you once we can see the Milky Way come into view that it will map the elevation using those lines. So again, the horizon would be 0 degrees, straight up would be 90 degrees. So let's advance the time. Currently we're at 5:16. Let's advance. Now we're into sunset. And you can see one thing you want to be careful of as you swipe left in the timeline. If you hold your finger down too long, it gives you a much more finite view of the timeline that you could advance very carefully minute by minute. I'm going to hold my finger down again to get back to that other view, and let's advance right to where the core is going to be visible. This is after sunset, and so let's look at, let's say, dial in 11 o'clock here. Okay, so at 11 o'clock, what this is showing is the dotted lines that appear from around, if this was a clock, that would be around 11:30 p.m. to about 5 p.m. in those positions. Those dotted lines, that's representing the elevation of the Milky Way arch itself. And you can see at 11 p.m. the arch is not going to be that high in the sky. It's going to be about 36 degrees up, and you can see that number up on that top, on the top portion of the screen, as well as if you counted the number of white circular lines were between the third and fourth, so that would be between 30 degrees and 40 degrees elevation. The very light white line is showing you the direction that the Milky Way arch will be visible, whereas the thicker white line going through that largest white dot is giving you the direction where the core will be visible. So it's a good planning tool, especially if you want a certain item to be in the foreground, where you can just continue to swipe left and see at what time of night that arch and core would intersect with perhaps a building or some other object on the ground that you wanted in the foreground of your photo. And you can see as we advance and it starts to get light out with sunrise, you're going to see the arch and the core disappear altogether because now there's just simply too much daylight. But a lot of good information here. The other thing you can do is go into night augmented reality mode. And if I was actually at this physical location, I can enable that now to see, visualize and overlay the Milky Way core and the Milky Way arch against the different objects that I would want in the foreground. So that's also very helpful. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so I do have a video when we talk about composition. I do have a video showing the augmented reality. I was able to get up there yesterday, and so I'll show that to you a little bit later in the presentation. So the other item in planning you want to consider is your weather conditions. And, you know, there's a lot of different challenges here. Cloud cover, but not only cloud cover, but it's going to be fog, haze, and humidity. And if it was anything like last summer, it's going to be smoke. Remember last summer we had the forest fires up in Canada, and they were actually impacting a lot of the Milky Way photography due to the haze, due to the smoke. So typically, this is as simple as just leveraging on some of the local weather sources. I know I have the NBC Connecticut app, and I'll take a look at that and see what the humidity is forecasted and what cloud cover is forecasted. Another app I like is Weather Underground, because I think it does a good job on cloud cover as well and on dew point. And that can be important because you just want to make sure your lenses are dry and that you don't have any dew buildup on the lens as well. These are some of the weather apps I use on my phone. So my ambient weather is for my own weather station here in Farmington. And then the other ones are just different apps that I'll check for different reasons. There is, if you really want to get into the more advanced, there's cleardarksky.com. And this is a little bit more technical with respect to the quality of the nighttime conditions for astrophotography. So again, it's a reference if you want to explore it further. The darker blues just mean better conditions, and the lighter colors are typically indicating potential issues that there could be. So that was planning. Any questions around planning? Okay, let's move to
The
equipment.
weather is the worst part.
Yeah, yeah,
My
yeah.
friend is Instagram friends and friends with Gil Simmons, chief meteorologist for Channel 8. So she will actually text him and ask him about the weather. So we get we get direct information from him.
Yeah, yeah, it's all the best planning in the world, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
could
Oh, that's the worst part.
yeah, I was thinking that Pennsylvania, boy, it'd be great to get out there
Yeah.
and camp a night or two. And then I'm like, yeah, but it's still, weather is you can't
Yeah.
predict it.
The,
So
the first time I wanted to do Milky Way, I was going up to the Cape. So I took a half day from work, drove all the way up there. Literally was like crossing the bridge. And my friend calls, a big fog bank or something just rolled in. And
yeah,
the sky was quote unquote clear, but it was all fog.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Terrible.
yeah. Okay, let's move on to equipment. So must-haves, digital camera, a wide or ultra wide lens. So we're looking at maybe 14 to 24 millimeter in a tripod. You need a good sturdy tripod that's not going to shake. If if you get a little bit of wind, you don't want the tripod or the camera shaking. You want to keep any kind of vibration out of the camera. Now, I did astrophotography back in the early 90s with film. But I don't really want to get into the details of film cameras for Milky Way photography. Some people still use film for star trails, but that's a little bit more advanced and certainly something we could talk about offline because film, you get into reciprocity of films and how they capture light over time. And so we're going to stick with digital cameras for this discussion. A wide, ultra wide lens, and make sure you have a tripod. Now, the good to haves are going to be a remote shutter release, or also known as an intervalometer, a flashlight, and in some cases, very important, having a headlight with a red light, just so that you're not damaging your nighttime vision or anybody else's nighttime vision that may be around you. Extra camera batteries, these long exposures are going to eat batteries. And especially if you combine long exposures with cold weather, you're going to go through batteries pretty quick. Lens warmer or dew heater, if the dew point is at a point where your lens could potentially get cold and collect dew. Lens cleaning cloths, because in the dark, I always seem to be able to leave a fingerprint on my lens, and the chair just to stay comfortable. And the digital camera, you're going to be in fully manual mode. So you're really going to need the ability to set your ISO, shutter speed, your aperture, You're gonna be in manual focus, and you need a camera that you can take long exposures with. Ultra wide lenses, I have the Nikon, the 14 to 24 millimeter, the f2.8, and you can get these used today for around $600. I checked KEH Camera a month or two ago. A lot of people like the Sigma lenses, but there's other people that go with lenses that are half of this price and still get very good results. So you just have to do your research on lenses and what's good for nighttime photography. But I know a lot of other professionals that use either the Sigma or the Nikon with good results. And on the tripod, you really want a good sturdy tripod. Especially, you know, when by the time you mount your camera, a lens, you're potentially an intervalometer. You just want something that's going to hold the weight and it's going to be rock solid and steady. The other feature is an L bracket in case you want to do a different composition, a vertical composition. It's just another feature that's handy to have. And a remote shutter release and intervalometer. So this is going to help in a lot of ways because you can configure these to start after a certain delay time. So let's say you wanted to light paint a foreground. You could actually tell your intervalometer to begin taking pictures maybe 30 seconds or a minute or two after you start it. You could then light paint in your foreground in the scene. You can tell it the number of exposures, the exposure time, and then how much time you want between exposures. Now, some cameras have this capability, but not all. So again, you want to look at what features your camera has and determine if you need one or not. I got to tell you, this is where my process has broken down so many times because I use the intervalometer in daylight and everything seems fine. But when you're in darkness and you're trying to do this with just a red light, I don't know, something always seems to go wrong. So I have fallen back on my Nikon's built-in intervalometer more than once because I could not get my my external one to work properly. So this is probably the one component I've had the most challenge with. Flashlights with a red light. So what we're trying to do is, first off, you want a flashlight or a headlight for safety reasons, right? You also may want to use this for light painting, but keep in mind that red light is really important for night vision. And if you are in a space where other people are doing astrophotography, make sure you have a red light because people will start yelling at you if you have a white light and you're shining a white light around people that are trying to maintain night vision to do their astrophotography work. So I was up in Vermont back in the mid 90s. It was a telescope convention. And you just didn't want to be that one person that showed up with a flashlight and turned it on a group of people that were out there with their telescopes trying to get pictures. And extra batteries. I will always have a couple of extra batteries, but to be honest, what I'm eventually going to move to is a much bigger battery pack that plugs into my Z7 II through a USB connection. My camera can be configured to take power off of a USB-C, and that's how I plan to do this going forward. Because you don't want to be in the middle of a shoot and all of a sudden you're down to 10% battery life, and then you have to interrupt your series of photographs because you got to swap the battery. A lens warmer. I got to tell you, when I was in the desert, did not need a lens warmer. But you really should keep an eye on, if it's going to get cold at night, and keep an eye on the dew point. What some people do is they actually buy these hand warmers, and on Amazon you can buy a Lens Muff, I believe is just one brand. But you can buy these fabric things that will hold the hand warmers, wrap that around your lens to keep your lens warm. So I've seen people use this. I have not used it yet, but it's something to consider. In lens cleaning wipes, because I gotta tell you, I always wind up touching something I shouldn't have touched on the camera. So lens cleaning wipes, for me, it's a must. And a chair. You're just gonna spend a lot of time. You might as well get comfortable out there doing it. Any questions on equipment?
I have one question that's related to focusing, or well, I could consider it a question of lens or focusing process. On my widest lens is an XCD lens, and I hate it that they don't have an aperture scale on them, so I can't focus on the hyperfocal distance. The other night, Sunday night, the best I was able to figure out was the only light I saw in my viewfinder was the tower light. So I put it in autofocus and focused as best I could on that. Then when I saw that the light, that part was coming in focus, I put it back into manual focus, but I knew that wasn't giving me the hyperfocal distance. I needed to on something much further out. Do you have any suggestions?
Some of the recommendations from other photographers are to carry a laser pointer and use that for focusing, or simply use a flashlight and put an object at your hyperfocal distance and use that to focus. What I have learned, and we'll talk about this in the execution phase, is to focus at infinity, but then use live view. So take an image and then use live view and zoom in to check focus. And again, you could take the same attempt at a closer object where you're doing your best estimate at focus, but then using live view and zooming in to check the actual focus and adjusting that accordingly. But it can be a challenge because it's dark and it's very hard to focus.
I just had a light come on that I hadn't thought of before. I could go out there during the day.
I was going to say that, Owen. That's what I do.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Focus on a good hyperfocal distance, or a good distance to set the hyperfocal distance, and then take some gaffer tape and tape the lens of that to the camera, and be careful to not move it.
Yeah, that's what I do. I take it out during the day and figure out where that, because infinity isn't the spot you want to focus on usually.
Right.
So I go out and I take the farthest thing I can find and I focus on it, and then I either mark it or tape it. But then I use the I don't know what it's called. The manual focusing aid, like most cameras have it, so it'll show you in red or whatever color what's in focus when you're on manual focus, and that helps too. But when you're in the Milky Way, it's like, it's you just got to get as far as you can, essentially. And because you're shooting at 2.8, the stuff in the foreground is usually in focus too. So
yeah, I couldn't. There wasn't any lights coming on in my viewfinder. Get what they call.
I can't remember what it's called.
Well, but there was just nothing to create any light from anything except for the headlight itself.
Yeah. So I mean, you could consider a flashlight or an LED at a foreground object.
Yeah, but that's still, that would bring the hyperfocal distance in, whereas I want
Yep.
the hyper distance out
Yep.
to infinity.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't have any like really good ways to do that. I do know some photographers do just that. They'll focus and then, so they'll focus in either daytime or the bright flashlight, and then they'll tape the focus ring on the lens so it doesn't move.
yeah, that's what I'll do.
So
Some of-
I know some people do that. Yeah.
Some of the Olympus cameras have a thing called Starry Skies, and it
Wow.
will autofocus if you have the Starry Skies option.
Very cool.
I'm sure the OM ones do. I
Yeah,
know
most of them
yeah.
do.
the newer ones do, yeah, or more newer-ish ones, yeah. It doesn't have to
And
be
just
brand new,
point
but
it
yeah.
at the sky, set it to starry sky
Nice.
autofocus, and you're done.
Nice.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay, let's go on to the next part of the presentation. That's the execution. So my advice, visit the location before sunset. It's going to help you assess what compositions are there and also identify trip hazards or any other things that you should be careful of. Always good to let someone know where you're going when you plan.
That takes the fun out of it, Kevin.
Go with others, dress for the temperature conditions. Allow your eyes to adjust. It takes, it's going to take 10 minutes. I mean, your eyes will take several hours to fully adjust to night vision, but your cone cells take a good 10 minutes. And then use that red light. You want to preserve your night vision. So don't be using a standard flashlight unless you have a red filter or simply a red light flashlight. Shooting raw is important. You want to capture as much detail for post-processing. White balance recommendation is a little different if there's a moon versus no moon, but I'd recommend maybe starting around 3900. And again, that's just a consideration as your starting point. You may need to modify that slightly. You're going to want long exposure noise reduction off in this case. And keep in mind that long exposure noise reduction, when that is on, if you take a 30-second exposure, your camera is going to be tied up for another 30 seconds, creating its own dark slide to use to subtract the noise out of that initial image. So all the pros say, look, make sure that long exposure is off. It's just going to slow down your process and it's not going to be very helpful. And make sure your high ISO noise reduction is off as well. You're going to want to choose a higher native ISO, but again, you really need to do some research here. The good news for me is with the Z7 II, Nikon's done some astrophotography tutorials online. And so I kind of honed in on the ISO based on what the pros and what Nikon was doing with that camera. But you kind of want to find out from other pros what they feel is the correct ISO to be using. Something that's not going to introduce, certainly you want a native ISO. You don't want too much noise introduced. So my consider is that you start with an ISO between 4000 and 6400. And then you got to use the histogram to check for over or under. And you really can't rely on the live display. We're going to use it for focusing. Like I said, I'll zoom in to check focus, but don't try to use a live display to assess your overall exposure. You definitely want to turn on your histogram and make sure that you're not, blown out in one direction or another with the histogram. With the aperture, you're going to want to go wide as possible with your lens. This is, I think, a mistake I've made in the past because I've always stepped down 1 or 2 from my widest aperture because I had always thought that my widest aperture also would introduce a lot of coma. or other, just lens aberrations are more apparent at your widest aperture. But the pros are saying, look, you really want to get the widest possible aperture that your lens is going to support. Your only consideration is that wider apertures do mean less depth of field. So if you have close foreground objects, you're going to have to consider your lens, your hyperfocal distance, focus stacking, or stacking images post-processing. So, again, you're gonna a wider, a 14 millimeter lens, it's going to be a little bit better for depth of field than if you were shooting with a 50 millimeter at a wide aperture. But it's just something to understand. Understand the lens, understand the depth of field in what you're working with.
I need to ask about the focus stacking. We talked earlier about how the photos I got Sunday night, the stars trailed out just slightly, so they're not a perfect circle. You mentioned focus stacking, and that would blend it all together. But the question I have is, I would do 3 photos. Each of the 3 photos the stars would still be streaked out some.
Yeah, I would think so. I think you need to look at shutter speed, and I'm going to talk about two different methods for determining shutter speed. Because if you're seeing slight star trails, I believe shutter speed is the issue, Owen.
Yeah, I used 16 seconds. I could have gotten by with 8. I think if I would have gone down below 8, then it would have been too dark. Of course, I could adjust it after post, but I don't
Yep.
do any more post than I have to. I want to keep as much in the camera as I can.
Right. So there's this rule of 500. And the rule of 500 is the goal here is to try to balance image quality as well as minimize the star trails. But for example, if I am shooting and setting my shutter speed via the rule of 500, and I'm shooting with that Nikon 14 millimeter lens, that would mean that I should not be shooting more than 36 seconds. Okay. So what you're doing is you're taking 500, you're dividing that by the focal length of your lens. If you're in a full frame sensor camera, for me, that would have been 36 seconds. Now, if it's crop sensor, then you need to multiply your lens by 1.5, then divide 500 by that to get number of seconds. Some pros shoot with the rule of 500, and others say that no, it's just not good enough anymore because of the sensors and just how sensitive the newer sensors are. There's a newer rule, the NPF rule, that is supposed to determine your shutter speed that's not going to show star trails. And this calculation includes your camera's resolution when it determines the shutter speed. Now, to determine your shutter speed using the NPF rule, you can just Google and put in your information on a website that will do the calculation for you, or you can go into Photo Pills and they actually have a pill called Spot Stars. You can put in your camera,
Yeah.
the lens, your aperture, and you can tell it if you want pinpoint accurate stars. And for the NPF rule, see, Owen, mine would have said I could not shoot more than, call it 8 seconds. Okay.
Okay.
So according to NPF, if I shot more than 8 seconds, if we zoomed in on the image, we will see slight star trails. Versus the rule of 500, which would have said 36 seconds is the longest I could shoot. So you may want to look, Owen, you may want to put in your camera model.
Oh, yeah, it's in. Yeah, I've done that.
Okay. And did your NPF rule, did it tell you, did it recommend something lower than what you were shooting at?
I need to look at it more closely.
Okay. Yeah, I would still think shutter speed is what's impacting you.
Yeah, when I put in the information about my camera and lens, I didn't have any idea that this is where that was going. So now that I do, now I know what to
Good.
look.
Yep. If you're gonna stack, and when I do Milky Way photos, I'm stacking. If you are gonna stack, you're gonna want to take some dark slides, also known as dark frames or dark images. And basically, all you're doing is when you're taking your series of photographs of the Milky Way, you're putting your lens cap back on the camera for some of those images so that your camera is recording noise in the same exact conditions that it's taking the images of the Milky Way. Okay. And then the different post-processing software will then use those dark slides to actually remove the noise from the actual images that you've taken. Okay. And here's just some guidelines and focus. Do not use a UV filter. You're going to manual focus. You're going to turn off lens camera body stabilization. And again, focusing to infinity as a starting point and then using live view to zoom in to confirm sharpness. That's fine if you don't have a foreground image. If you have other images in your composition, then you're going to have to look at hyperfocal or other ways to focus. Okay, and if you're going to stack images, you're going to want to use the intervalometer, either an external or built-in, to take multiple exposures. You're going to want short delay between those exposures, and you're going to want to include dark frames. So stacking 30, 40, 50 images is not a problem. It's not a problem. It's not a problem for the software. So I did get up to Barn Door Hills, to that parking lot where I demonstrated the photopills, and I got up there during the day just to kind of look around. And let's just walk through this.
Right, so I made it up to McLean Game Refuge at Barn Door Hills Road, and just a little assessment of the location. And one thing to note would be airport traffic. So that's something we can deal with if we're doing stacked exposures. But here's the scene, and then we'll go into photopills and do some augmented reality.
Okay, so that's kind of assessing the site for, what could we use in our composition? Are there foreground objects that we would want to compose into the overall shoot? But I noticed the flight path, right? So a lot of planes going in and out of Bradley. You're not worried about noise, but you are worried about lights. So I'd be worried about red and green lights on the planes as they're going in for landing or takeoff. And of course, any headlights if they're coming towards you. Stacking is going to help you deal with that a lot better than if you're doing just one long exposure. So through stacking, I can filter out those images, or I can just decide not to even include those when I go to stack the image. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how the virtual reality of photopills worked at the site. Now, so what I did a recording on my iPhone, but then I actually turned my iPhone from this portrait to a landscape mode. So you kind of like tilt your head as we go here.
Okay, so I've dropped a pin. I decided to walk down the path a little bit, and that was mostly just to get away from people talking in the parking lot so I could do this recording. But just looking at photopills, I can see that I have it set for July 5th, which is a new moon in July. And I'm going to move my time slider, and you can see that visibility really is going to begin closer to 10 p.m. And at that point, the galactic core would be 17 degrees up, which should work. And the overall arch is going to be closer to 50 degrees. So that's really good. So let's turn on augmented reality. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kick the time. Let's bring this up to 11 p.m. Yeah, let's turn on augmented reality. And now we're going to take a look and see where the Milky Way would be visible. And so there we can see, of course we can't see that 11 p.m. That's below the horizon. But 11 p.m., if I'm reading that correctly, the core would be kind of right in line with that hill. And then the arch would be, yeah, 50 degrees up, and there's the other side of the arch, and that would be behind me. So that's pretty cool. That gives me a visualization of where that arch is going to be and help me with any composition with objects in the foreground. So yeah, like it. Certainly helpful in planning.
Okay, any questions on that? It really is a cool tool. The augmented reality is pretty neat. With that said, it's only as good, I believe, as the cellular signal you have around you. And John, Frank, and I could attest to that when we were looking at the moon rise over Hebeline Tower, because each of us had a little bit different outcome from the PhotoPills planner. So do I think it's perfect? No, but does a pretty good job. Any questions on that? Okay, if not, we're going to move into post-processing. So if you're going to be taking multiple images of the Milky Way and then stacking those images, there's a number of applications that you can do that. Sequator is a Windows-based application that's free, and it's the one that I have been using. There is a Mac application called Starry Landscape Stacker. That is something I'm going to start using because I'm trying to move all of my photo workflow over to a Mac platform and away from my Windows platform. And of course, Photoshop can be used as well. Although the feedback I have seen on Photoshop is just not as fast as some of these other tools that are dedicated for stacking astro photos. So what I will do, and kind of where I am in my process right now, is collecting my star images, all my raw images, and my dark slides, bringing those into the Sequator application. And I've done a lot less on the right-hand side once I have that stacked image, but that's kind of where I'm going to next as far as my workflow and trying to improve my process. So the Sequator app is used to stack star images. These should all be at the same focal length, exposure, and aperture. So it really should be one single series of photographs. I will recommend that if you are, like when I was down in the desert, I took 10 or 15 photographs in one orientation, and then I changed my orientation and I took additional photos. I'd recommend that you include a dark slide between those movements. It helps you when you're trying to sort, when you get back into wherever you're going after you're done photographing. It just kind of helps you keep track of what images are part of what composition you were doing. With this application, you can include dark slides to remove noise. You can also include vignetting images to help correct for any lens light drop off in the corners. And it will allow you to stack the sky portion of the image while leaving the ground or below the horizon unstacked, which is kind of neat. So I'm going to show you a demo of this. I'm going to put 8 star images into the tool with 2 dark slides. And in this demo, I'm turning on just about every option there is. So these are the ones I'm starting with. What I have done is my dark slides, I always try to rename so that I can find them easier. And then I have 8 images. This is down in the desert, down in the Baja. So when you launch Sequator, it's a pretty simple user interface. In the upper left portion, you're going to identify the files that you're going to work with, your star images, any noise images, and how you want the output and what the name of the output file will be. And then in the lower left is the operations that you want the software to perform. So we're going to start by double-clicking star images. We're going to select the actual star images. In this case, I have 8, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. By default, the application has said that it's going to use image 4949 as its base. So this is the image that is going to try to stack all the other images on top of. So what I do at this point is make sure that this image does not have any artifacts that I would not want to be part of the output of the stacking operation. So for example, if an airplane was flying through, you would not want that as part of your base image unless your goal was to capture a trail of light from an airplane as part of your overall image. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select our noise images as well. These are the 2 dark slides that I took. These were taken actually at the very beginning and at the very end of the sequence of star images that I took. And now I'm going to select the output file. I'm just going to call this example.tiff. It's going to be our output. So now we're going to configure how we want Sequator to actually process our star images. And again, the goal here is to stack the star images. So let's start with composition. And we're going after alignment of stars versus star trails. We're going to go down to the sky region. And we're going to say that it is an irregular mask. And what we're going to do, similar to Lightroom, is we're going to use this masking tool now to come in and identify the sky area. The sky area will be the area that we want stars stacked with. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to quickly go through here, select sky area. And you do this by simply holding down the left mouse. If you make a mistake, then hold down the right mouse and it will reverse the mask. So let's get that a little bigger. Oops. So I selected the sky area, everything's selected. And I'm just going to come along here and do a little better job on the horizon. And then right click here. And let's correct that. Okay. I am going to select auto brightness and turn that on. I am going to turn on high dynamic range. I am going to turn on remove dynamic noises. I'm going to turn on reducing distortion effects. I'm going to turn on reduce light pollution. I am going to turn on enhance starlight. and I'm going to turn on merge for pixels. Now what you're going to find is that you're going to need to experiment. For this image, I actually used 3 or 4 different variations to determine what I felt the best output from the stacking tool would be. So let's go ahead and we're going to click start. And what this will do is initially load your noise images and apply that noise against the star images that you've loaded. So it's going to remove that noise from all the associated star images, and then it will perform the alignment. At some point here, it's going to give us an estimate of the time remaining. And so 2 minutes remaining. I'm going to let this continue, but for the demo, I'm going to fast forward to the end of the processing so that we can view the image.
Kevin, over what period of time did you take the images of the stars? You said they were 10 seconds each, but over what period of time were they?
I think I had a 5-second delay between images. Okay, the program has completed processing. We're going to go ahead, close out of this dialog box, and we will now view the output from Sequator. And then the next step would be to take this file and bring this into Lightroom or Photoshop for additional post-processing. So John, to answer your question, I was pretty short. I think I was only waiting maybe 5 seconds, maybe between 5 and 10 seconds between frames, but I was not waiting a long period of time at all.
But during that entire period of time, obviously the Earth is continuing to rotate.
Yes.
The stars are going to align differently. Does this program just show more stars?
No. This program is actually doing an alignment. So it's doing a pattern mask, and then it is matching to the base image. So it is compensating for the Earth rotation in the sky portion of the image, while leaving the ground stable. And that's what's pretty cool about it.
Very cool.
Yeah. The a lot of people have had good luck with that Mac program. I haven't used it, but I will be getting into it. And there's a handful of other ones out there as well. And the people that are the heavy Photoshop users said that, look, you can do it in Photoshop, but it's a lot more manual. You have to do that alignment. It's a bit more manual process. My first software I learned was at Sequator. So that's kind of what I know the best. There are some links I included. There's a really good tutorial out there for astrophotography using Sequator for stacking and aligning. And then the first 3 links are to the actual program itself. I believe it's a program that a developer in Taiwan has put together. And in the manual, there's some really good recommendations on those different options within the software and what you should enable. He did mention that you really need to have at least 4 images to stack for many of those options to do anything. So honestly, the feedback I've had from other people is the more the better. Don't feel bad about, taking too many. So before we go into Star Trails, any other questions on post-processing? And I have to say, it's for me, it's a learning process, right? I mean, a year from now, I might be recommending the Starry Sky or another piece of software because I've taken time to get up to speed on it. But my feeling is, when I'm doing Milky Way shots, I prefer to stack because I think it gives me more options at the end of the day. And with the software that's out there today for doing the alignment to adjust for the Earth rotation, I don't see the downside. I can get rid of any images that have artifacts that I don't want, such as an airplane or a satellite. And I have less concern about star trails because I can reduce down my overall shutter speed. If there's no questions, we're going to talk about star trails. I only have a handful of slides on star trails. It's something that I am just learning now, getting a little bit more familiar with. But let's take a look. So here's an example of an image. And again, this is really showing the Earth's rotation. The camera itself is pointed at the North Star, also known as Polaris. And this is a series of stacked images over a 45-minute duration. And by the way, I believe this is over 200 images that were stacked. So again, don't be too concerned about the number of images because the software today is going to be able to handle that. So where do you point your camera? Well, if you want those circular star trails, then you want to point your camera at the North Star or at Polaris. And the way you find that is to find the Big Dipper, and then you're going to take and draw a line on these two stars of the Dipper. You're going to go straight out. This is about 5 times the distance of these two stars. And that's going to bring you to Polaris. Now, PhotoPills also has in virtual reality, it will help you find where Polaris is. And many of your other astronomy apps on your phone will also help you find it. So if you're having trouble finding the Big Dipper and drawing a line over to Polaris, there's other apps that you can use to find it. Now, again, there's a lot of challenges with star trails because to capture the trails, it's going to take several minutes to hours to capture star trails of any significance. And the problem is doing very long exposures is going to introduce a lot of noise. And that's going to require you to have that long exposure noise reduction turned on. The only problem with that is if you do a 15-minute exposure, your camera's tied up another 15 minutes doing a noise exposure. So again, the recommendation is to stack. It's going to reduce the risk of artifacts, and it's going to give you more options in case something occurs and you need to dispose of just one of those images. So where you point your camera is going to impact the direction that you capture. Directly to the North Star, circular trails, closer to the horizon, and you're going to get a star trail depending on where you are on the Earth. Again, so what your latitude is going to dictate what those trails look like based on the Earth's rotation. So figuring out exposure, the advice is to capture a test image using a high ISO. So in this example, set your ISO to around 6400. Again, a wide aperture and 30-second shutter speed. Take your test image, but then examine the histogram and make your adjustments to your shutter speed based on the histogram. Okay, so you don't want it completely over or underexposed. You want something that's going to be in the middle. Do your test exposures, adjusting your shutter speed, and when you feel that you have something acceptable, then do your calculation of an equivalent exposure for a lower ISO. So the 6400 rule is that a 30-second exposure at 6400 equals a 30-minute exposure at ISO 100. If you move your ISO to 200, then you half your exposure. Now you're down to 15 minutes. So the 6400 rules is a good rule of thumb. Or you can use, PhotoPills has an exposure pill that will also help you calculate an equivalent. So if you decide, hey, I really want ISO 4000, 18 seconds, that's where I want to be, but I want that to be an 18-minute because I want to capture a longer trail, then go into PhotoPill, plug in your data, and it will tell you the equivalent exposure time at that lower ISO. For post-processing, again, Sequator can be used. This time you're going to tell it that you want star trails versus stars spots themselves. But Photoshop also can do this very effectively. And there's a great video out from B&H Photo on how to use Photoshop for star trails. And there's also some free third-party plugins for Photoshop that can give you a lot of creative things that you can do with the star trails. So there's a great tutorial online with PhotoPills that you can look at. And I also would recommend this B&H Photo Pro Audio, this tutorial. It's a really good tutorial on star trails. And I included both of the references here. And that is it. That is what I had to present tonight. So I think let's go to questions, see if anybody has any questions.
Kevin, is the Sequitur like a plugin for Photoshop or Lightroom, or is it a standalone program?
It's a
both.
standalone program, and unfortunately it's a Windows program. So if you're on a Mac,
Nope.
if you're using a Mac for all your photo processing and you don't have access to a Windows machine, then it's not going to do you any good.
Okay.
But it is a thick client type application that runs on Windows.
Okay, thanks.
You said PhotoPills was $10.99. Is that one-time purchase? You own it, or is that per year?
And I forget.
I think you own it.
I think
You
you
own
own
it.
it, yeah,
It's
because I've never paid either.
One-time purchase.
So one time, good.
I use Planet, and I think it's good, but all these things you showed me on PhotoPills, I think I'm gonna get the PhotoPills too.
PhotoPills has so many other features. It's really a good thing to have.
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
There's a lot to PhotoPills, and even using the Milky Way, using the planning tool for the Milky Way, take time. Go through it a handful of times before you actually need to do it in the field. There's a lot of good information there, but it can be a little intimidating the first time you use it because you're getting sun data, you're getting moon data, you're getting Milky Way data. So it's good to go in and declutter the view by turning off those layers. I found that to really help out in learning and understanding how it works.
Yeah, then making sure you got the right date set.
Yeah, and the right location too.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, your virtual reality is based on where that pin is dropped. It's not based on where you physically are at any given time. So that's tripped me up as well, where I'm doing VR and all of a sudden I go, oh, wait a minute, my pin is still in the last location and I'm no longer at that location. So you really gotta just think it through when you're using it.
Boy, Kevin, this has been superb. I mean, I've heard a number of lectures on this, and I'm still confused, but I'm much less confused. You're very methodical and lay things out very clearly. So thank you
Thanks,
so
John.
much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning. I've been trying to get this technically better because I had a lot of assumptions going into it. With that Nikon lens, my assumption is I should probably be shooting at f4 because it's going to be a sharper, I'm going to get less lens aberrations than a fully wide open lens. Most lenses don't perform their best at their widest opening on their aperture, right? But in talking to other people that have been doing this a lot longer than they're like, no, just open up your aperture and start there. Don't start backing off because you're really impacting the amount of light coming in.
Yeah, because I mean, in reality, the long zooms like the 150 to 600, they're sharpest at their widest aperture
Interesting.
by design.
Yep, that's interesting. Yeah.
Kevin, I've read a lot in photo pills and watched quite a few videos, but your presentation tonight has really cleared up a lot in my mind about how to do this. So I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, Meg. I'm glad you got something from it. That's good.
Yeah, kudos, Kevin. Your presentation was excellent. And just it's mind-boggling how brilliant people are who create photo pills and Sequator and all these things. How do they do it? It's absolutely mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Yeah,
So many brilliant people that are part of all of this,
yeah,
which is kind of
it's
fun.
definitely good stuff. So I think the next step is to actually try to do an outing around doing photos of the Milky Way. So, we're still thinking about that Barn Door Hill Road location. It actually is quite a nice location, and it's a pretty safe location. There's not a lot of trip hazards. Um, So that might be a decent place to go I would kind of recommend August timeframe just from a standpoint of when the Milky Way would be visible. I mean, yes, we're going to have light pollution there, but we're going to have light pollution in a lot of places in Connecticut. It's kind of hard to get away from it, but I've taken Milky Way photos up on the Cape, and yeah, there's some light pollution, but you still get some pretty good details in the Milky Way. And Nancy's photo in Rhode Island I thought it was fantastic. I mean, there was really great detail in the Milky Way there. And if I remember a few months ago, Libby had a photo from Maine with the Milky Way by the shore. And that was also, what a great photograph. So there are good opportunities. And I would say don't let all that light pollution discourage you. Get out and try it out. And it's one of these things where you just got to do it and get the experience and learn from the experience.
Kevin, I was reading about the Ninigret Park down there in Charleston. That is one of the darkest locations in southern New England to go for images, and it's a great spot. It's a big field and everything. It used to be an old airfield. Another great spot. On a totally different note, I don't know if anybody noticed that the full moon this month on the 21st will be at the very lowest full moon seen in years. So it's going to be one of the more spectacular full moons that you would see. And it rises like a 8:45, and the best time is like 10 after 9. So
Very
something
cool.
else to look for.
Thank you.
If you're
That's
maybe
cool.
down by the ocean looking out, good spot for it.
Yeah, Bill, I took that picture of the Milky Way of the observatory at Ninigret, and there are a few nice places in that park to get nice foreground shots too. That's not the only place. You can go down by the water. There's places where there's nice trees. It's a nice place to go, and it is dark. And if
Yes.
you have any questions about it, like if you want to go, and you have a question about it, the Charlestown Police Department is always very helpful. I called them during COVID to make sure it was open. They were super helpful, and they're right outside the entrance, so it is a very safe place to go as far as anything happening to you.
Nice.
Nancy, who did you call?
I called the Charlestown Police Department because I was
Oh.
like, hey, can we get into the park? Can we do this? Like, because we were during COVID, could we get in? But then there's been other times I called them for something and they're like super helpful. I think they don't have much to do. So they're like, but it really is dark there. Like you'd be surprised and the Cape is also very dark at night.
And that observatory is open on Friday nights in the summertime. Usually just about every Friday night.
Yeah, and every once in a while they have an event going on there, and that's a very popular place to go to get the Milky Way there. Yep. But like if you just keep going down the road, there's other places to go to. So And it's like, I don't know how long it is from my house. It's about 2 hours. I'm a little closer to the highway than Finsbury, but it's not a bad
I make
drive.
it an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I have a place
Well, you
down
drive
there
faster than
next
I
town
do.
over, so.
Yeah.
It's right down the road from me.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, the only thing is the weather. Like you can think it's going to be good, and you drive all the way there, and it's that's
Yeah.
like I always say, nature sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
This was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Kevin.
thank you,
Welcome.
Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. This has been wonderful.
Good. I'm
Excellent.
glad you
Good night.
enjoyed it. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
You
Good
too.
night.
Thank you.
Everybody.